Hashem Hashem, Na'aseh v'natzliach. Shalom Aleichem and welcome everyone as we enter Parshat Noach. Tofshin Pei Daled. At the end of last week's Parashat Bereshit, there's a pasuk, the last pasuk in Sefer Bereshit, in Parashat Bereshit. Last pasuk in Parshat Bereshit, a pasuk that you're all familiar with. Many of us say this pasuk in Havdalah. What a pasuk! It says, "V'Noach matzah hen be'enei Amonai," and Noach found favor in the eyes of Hashem. The Orach Chaim HaKadosh. The Orach Chaim HaKadosh says, what does this mean? V'Noach matzah hen be'enei Amonai. And the Orach Chaim HaKadosh writes, you should know Noach did not survive because he was tzaddik. Not because he was a tzaddik. Because I'll tell you how. A tzaddik is someone who doesn't have averot, right? Doesn't have sins. But he says, if the Mabul was only supposed to kill those who have sins, then what about all the kitanim? All the little kids. Little kids can't be punished, they don't have sins. Even though they have sins, but it's not counted. So how can all the children die? He says, rather must be the gezerah was to kill everyone. So why was Noach saved? Not because Noach was tzaddik, but because Noach matzah chen be'enei Amonai. Somehow Noach found favor in the eyes of Hashem. Says Orach Chaim HaKadosh, he says as follows. There's some mitzvot that they put chen, they put favor on a person. And he says, Shalosh or arba mitzvot yeduot. There are 3 or 4 mitzvot that give a person chen, meaning you're not deserving of being saved. You're not deserving of getting what you need, what you want. But because you do these things, somehow hand comes on you, a favor, and a Kadosh Baruch Hu saves you. And a Kadosh Baruch Hu helps you out. And he says there's 3 or 4, but he does not elaborate. Says Rahim Kadosh doesn't elaborate what the 3 or 4 is. He leaves us hanging. What is this hand? Who doesn't want hand? Everybody wants hand. I want hand. That's why we say, and Havdalah, V'Noach matzah chen be'enei Amonai. My minhag is to say 3 times, V'Noach matzah chen be'enei Amonai, V'Noach matzah chen be'enei Amonai, V'Noach matzah chen be'enei Amonai. And then we say, right, Ken nimtzah chen v'sechato be'enei Elohim ve'Adam. I have to understand why you say be'enei Elohim ve'Adam. And the pasuk it just says, V'Noach matzah chen be'enei Amonai. And then what we say, we should also find favor in the eyes of Hashem and in the people. We'll get to there, but it's not Hashem. First, we have to understand how do we get hen? How can we get favoritized, get favoritism on us that we're protected? That even if we're undeserving. Interesting. Rosh Hashanah night, many have a minhag to come home, and before they make kiddush, there's a lot to read. One of the things it says to read there is V'Noach matzah chen be'enei Amonai 12 times. And if it's in a leap year, there's some say to say 13 times. So every month, we find favor in the eyes of Hashem. So the real question is, how does one find favor? Or Chaim says it's 3 or 4 mitzvot. I cannot give you all 3 or 4, I don't know. But I'm going to go with a path that I've heard today, in the past week. In the past I've heard about it, this past 3 days I've been working on trying to understand what is this chen. Everybody needs chen now. Everybody needs it. So what is it? So they say, there's a pasuk in Mishlei. There's a pasuk in Mishlei in Perek Gimel, pasuk Lamed Daled. The end of the pasuk says, "V'la'anavim yiten chen." And for those who are humble, they're anav. When you're an anav, you get chen. Okay, just make it very clear. A humble person, a person with humility, gets favoritism from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Says the Vilna Gaon, If a person's insulted, he doesn't respond, he now has hen. And he says, based on this, that's how Noach got it. Part of it, he says, how did Noach get it? How did he continue to get hen? He says when he's building the teva for 120 years, everybody's coming making fun of him. Noach doesn't answer back. He just says, Hashem said to build it, and Mabul's coming. Zehu. He doesn't get in a fight with them, nothing. He just continues. He stays humble. The Mefarshim ask, okay, Noah has to save all the animals, right? So Hashem says, put more on the teva. And then, for 12 months, Noah became a zookeeper. Every minute of the day, he's busy feeding somebody, him and his children. One time he messed up, he got bitten for it, right? The Mefarshim ask, why Hashem couldn't, if Hashem making this whole miracle with the boat, which doesn't make any sense how the whole thing got saved, but Hashem already made the miracle. Well, Hashem couldn't feed the animals, he needed Noah to run around. The Mefarshim say, you know why? Hashem wanted to keep Noah humble. And so he said, Noah, don't think you're so great, you're getting saved. Go and be a zookeeper now. Take care of all the animals. We got to humble you down. In order for him to continue to have the hen, he was made humble. I saw over here, he writes further. He says, we know the Kohanim, they would have a lot of services in the Mikdash when they started. And the first service in the morning was what? Trumat Hadeshen. Which was what? Cleaning. Taking out the garbage. So the Mefarshim ask, the Kohanim, first job of the day is take out the garbage? Yes, you're Kohanim. You're working in the Mikdash, but you have to remain anav. You have to remain a humble person. Take out the garbage. You understand what we're saying right now? That HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives people the chance and the place to get favoritism. By how? By remaining humble. That means if you have gone through some incident and it didn't work out, you got upset and you were able to keep yourself back and you didn't answer back, you have just now gotten hen. You have just now gotten favoritism from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're going to be saved. This is what we have to work with. This is what we have to do. We have to realize that being a humble person is how we get hen. Rav Chaim Palaji in his Sefer Kaf HaHaim writes, the best possible remedy for all sins is to be a savlan, to be tolerant and forgiving. And it's better than any fasting. It's better than any suffering. Is when a person is humble. That brings him hen. That changes everything for him. Listen to this. Listen to this, Rabotai. The Sefer Kav HaYoshar in Perek Zayin brings down a midrash. There was a tzaddik that was walking with Eliyahu Hanavi, says the midrash. And there was a dead carcass on the street with a terrible smell. And the tzaddik is walking with Eliyahu and he's starting to close his nose. Eliyahu Hanavi is not closing his nose. Then, as they continue walking, there was a person, a scholar, but he was very arrogant. And Eliyahu Hanavi starts walking next to this guy, and he's closing his nose. So the tzaddik turns to Eliyahu Hanavi, and he tells Eliyahu Hanavi, I don't understand, when you walked by the dead animal's body, it was so smelly, you didn't close your nose. And when you walk by this scholar who's arrogant, you close your nose. And Eliyahu Hanavi said, that man's odor is worse than the dead animal. A dead animal has a tumah of one day. The contamination, the tumah of an arrogant person is much more severe. This is from Eliyahu Hanavi. Arrogance cannot fit with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. It doesn't work. Hashem cannot favor someone who's arrogant. Listen to this, Rabotai. The Midrash, Vayikra Rabbah, says Moshe Rabbeinu instructs the building of the Mishkan. He literally puts it up, right? He holds the crushim, he puts everything up. And when it's finally built, Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't walk inside. He waits for Hashem to call him. You built it. Walk inside. The Midrash says, you know why Moshe Rabbeinu didn't do that? Moshe, he was anav me'od. He said, I can't walk inside there. I'm not going to get the feeling because I built it, I'm going to walk in. And some people think I did it so I can do whatever I want. No, Moshe Rabbeinu said I cannot walk in. It's Hashem's house. So he made me build it. Doesn't mean I can walk inside. So now we see the opposite extremes. Being an anav gets you hen, gets you favor. Being arrogant, you smell terrible. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it says in Mishlei, cannot stand with those who are arrogant. There's no space, and not enough space in the universe for God and the arrogant person. Now, let's tell you a couple of stories about what it means to be humble. There's a famous story that said about Rav Simcha Bonim of Peshischa. There was a Jew. He was an expert tailor. He was very good in his job. All the noblemen, all the parts and all their families, all these, they would buy all their clothes from him. And one day, this this land baron calls him and says, my daughter's going to get married in a few months. I want you to make for me a suit fitting a king. I want it to be perfect, completely perfect. Everything has to be exact. Don't skimp. Get the most expensive stuff, work in as much, and I'll pay you for everything. And this man went to work for this Paretz and for his family and his wife and everybody. And after months after buying expensive material, working in it day and night, he comes and he brings it to the Paretz. The Paretz sees this suit and he says, you dirty Jew, what are you doing to me? You're going to give me this disgusting suit? He calls his wife in, look what they gave me. Garbage. And the man is saying, the Jewish man is saying, what are you talking about? I worked on so hard. He says, take it, and he throws it at him and says, get out of here. The man realized he just lost so much money. He spent so much money on the material. He spent hours and hours, day after day, week after week, building this beautiful suit. And so he goes to Rav Simcha Bonim, and he tells Rav Simcha Bonim B'Shishcha, he says, I don't understand what happened. And Simcha Bonim told him, are you going to listen to me? He says, yeah. He says, Rebbe, of course I listen to you. He says, go home and take off every stitch that you did to make this suit and then restitch it back in the exact same space. The guy did that. Hours and hours of taking apart a suit and putting it back in. And he then goes and brings it back to the parts, to this land baron. The baron sees the suit and he calls his wife, look at this, it's beautiful. It's amazing, wow. The Jew is, how could it be? I bought the exact same suit yesterday, right, the day before, and he disliked it. He threw me out, and now he loves it. So he goes back to Rav Simcha Bonim. And Rav Simcha Bonim explained it very simple. He said, when you first made that suit, you were so filled with haughtiness and arrogance. He picked me. I want to make so much money. I'm the best at my job. That's why I got it. And your arrogance it doesn't bring any favor to the eyes. To get favoritism, in order to find something favoritism, you have to be humble. You have to have humbleness. Like Noah. Noach מצא חן בעיני עמוני. וענבים ייתן חן. You know, it's interesting in the Perkei Avot, Rebbe says, which is the proper path that a man should choose for himself? Right? Perek Bet, Mishnah Aleph. And he says, whatever is a credit to himself and earns him the esteem of his fellow men. Meaning that it's not just, one way. You have to make sure that it's esteem you get from heaven as well as from the people. And that... So Rabbi Yehuda Anasi writes in Pirkei Avot, what's the proper path? What's a credit for himself and finds esteem in his fellow men. That's why we say in the Havdalah, V'no matzachem b'nei Amonai, ken nimtzachem v'secha tov b'nei Elohim ve'adam. It has to be so obvious that you find favor in Hashem's eyes and the eyes of the people. Rabbi Gamliel Rabinowitz says that that's why it says in the Parshat, Elo toladot Noach ish tzaddik. Why say Noach twice? Elo toladot Noach ish tzaddik. He says to tell you, Elo toladot Noach found favor in the eyes of Hashem. Noach ish tzaddik, he found favor in the eyes of men. That was Noach, a person who found favors in others. Now, how does a person become an anam? How does a person become a humble person? Well, the first thing to understand is that if you learn Torah and you learn mitzvot and you do mitzvot and masim tovim, you realize that everything comes from Hashem. So you already calm down. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was making a wedding for his son. He's on the day of the wedding. The chef comes over to him and tells him, this is way back in the day, and he says the fish that was supposed to be the main course, all the fish spoiled on the day of the wedding. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says, how did that happen? He says, I don't know, we tried refrigerating, it didn't work well. So Shlomo Zalman Auerbach tells the chef, shh, don't tell anybody anything. Especially don't tell the mechutan, don't tell my in-laws. Just make more salads, put more bread, put other things for substitution. Don't say anything. And the chef starts to laugh. So Shlomo Zalman says, why are you laughing? He says, guess what? The other side was here 5 minutes ago and I told him, and he told me the exact same thing. He says, don't tell the other side. Keep everything quiet. Didn't make any stink. Didn't start screaming at the chef. Didn't say, give me back my this, give me back that.
So why did he come to visit us?
Well, the chef did it. Why? Because he wanted to get himself clean from both sides. But you see how each one already moved on further with their lives. They say, Rabbi Gamliel shared this beautiful story. There was a Satmar Hasid, a Satmar Chassid. He was one of the Gaboyim of the Rebbe. It was the time that the Rebbe wasn't feeling so well. But he still wanted to make Tish Friday night. The Rebbe has a Tish, everyone comes. And Friday afternoon, this Gabbai comes to the Satmar Rebbe's house. They let him in because he's supposed to take care of the Tish. And he asks the Rebbe, how should I set it up? And while the Rebbe is telling us Chassid what to do for the Tish, the Rebbetzin walks in. And she tells her husband, the Satmar Rebbe, you're not going to no Tish tonight. And the Rebbe says to her, but I have to go. I promise people I'm going to be there. And she says, you're not feeling well, you're not going. So he turns to his Gabbai and says, his Gabbai, cancel it. The Gabbai says, he says, in my whole life, he says, the Satmar Rebbe was the greatest man I knew, the strongest man I knew, who stood up to everyone. Right? His approach was very radical, different from a lot of people's, and he had to stand up, he had to have a strong back. And he said, I never saw him ever give in to like this, and all of a sudden his Rebbetzin tells him, and it looks like the Rebbetzin stronger than the Rebbe. And as the Rebbe was walking me out, he says, the Rebbe turns to me and says, when it comes to Shalom Bayit, Everything is dependent on the trait of foregoing, of being mivater, of being an ananav. And you want to know who the winner is? The one who gives in. That's the winner in Shalom Bayit. Okay? So he says, if that's the way you see it, then being an ananav is very easy. Because you're the real winner. You're being mivater. You're the winner here. You're getting the hand. You're getting the favor. Talking about humbleness, talking about hand, we know that this week was the yahrzeit of Chacham Ovadia. And so I would like to share a quick story from Chacham Ovadia, and I think you can see in it his humbleness. It's a famous story. On a Mosei Shabbat, after his weekly lecture, it's for me. Thank you. After his weekly lecture in the synagogue Tiferet Yerushalayim, Chacham Ovadia was coming down the stairs when a newly religious-looking man walks over to Chacham Ovadia, kisses his hand, and says, "Rabbi, can you please write a note to my wife that having a television in home is asur? We're arguing over it and it's causing Shalom Bayit problems." Chacham Ovadia tells the man, "Put away the pen and paper. I'll come with you now to your house." This is Chacham Ovadia. Guys, a lot of things to do on this plate. A man who's learning Torah 24/7. And he says, "I'll go with you." The man says, "Rabbi, you don't have to. It's just a note will suffice." And he says, "A note will not do. Let's go." And so Mosei Shabbat, Chacham Ovadia goes with his man to his house. This man, he's coming home. He's telling his wife, Chacham Ovadia is here. She was so happy to see him. He talked to them a little bit. And he started to say how dangerous a TV is to have in the house. So the woman said, "If the rabbi came to our house at this time, late at night, it must be very important. We're going to throw out the TV first thing next morning." What Chacham Ovadia saying? He says, "No, we're not waiting for tomorrow morning. We're taking it out now." So he sent his assistant, his gabbai that was with him, and this husband together. They started taking it out of the apartment, walking down. And as they were going down, they accidentally bumped the television into the wall. And one said to the other, "Careful, careful." And Chacham Ovadia said, "Nothing careful. Bring it up again." He said, "Avodah zarah, you are supposed to break it up." And he made him bring it all the way down and throw it out. This was Chacham Ovadia. Person who saw things had to be done. Doesn't make a difference. Rav Elul Piyan, Zecher Tzadik L'Bracha, he saw once a cat in the yeshiva. So why'd you guys get a cat? They said, "Oh, we had a problem with the mice." And he said, "And since then, who's been feeding the cat?" The Bachum said, "We didn't think about that. A cat's a cat." Rabbi Elpian goes, he takes a bowl of milk and gives it to the cat. And he have pictures of that till today. He's enough. He's a humble person. The job has to get done. I'll do it. Noach, Ish Tzaddik, building a teva. Noach becomes a zookeeper. Because when you get humbled, and you feel humbled, and you don't feel arrogant, that's when a person is matzahin. That's when he finds favor. But Noach matzahin be'enei Amonai. And what's the name of Noach? What does Noach mean?
Relaxed.
Calm, relaxed. Kaliham, he's relaxed. He doesn't get angry. Noach backwards is hin, favor. When you're relaxed, people like to talk to you. When you're chilled, when you're okay, people can approach you and people can talk to you. If a person's always no one will find hate in them. And so our prayer is we should be able to find favor in the eyes of God and the eyes of people by being humble people. And that gives us favoritism that protects us. And Segulat to be saved, the Orach Chaim says, Noach had no reason to be saved other than the hand that he found in the eyes of Hashem. Okay. Now, let's move on to another lesson from this week's Parshat. One of my favorite of... I love all these lessons are very important, but this one is one of my favorites. The Skolya Rebbe, Zecher Tzadik Lebracha, he says in this week's Parashah, we have a remez, we have an allusion of the importance of saying stories of Achachamim. So our Thursday night shir here always has a lot of stories. And some people think, it's story time. It's not, it's not deep, it's light. And he says in this week's parasha, we have a remez of how important it is to say stories. And he says what? When it says, Ela toledot Noach ish tzadik tamim haya bedoratav. It tells him that he says Noach. These are the children of Noach. Noach was a tzaddik. Where's his children? It's in the next pasuk. Why don't you say it right away? So what does Rashi tell us? L'lamdecha, to teach you, she'ikr tolotayim shel tzaddikim ma'asim toivim. The main tolotayim, the main children of the tzaddikim are their good deeds. But says the Skolya Rebbe, ikr tolotayim shel tzaddikim ma'asim tovim. Ma'aseh. What's a ma'aseh? A story. Not just an action. Ma'aseh is also a story. Ma'asim tovim. The main part of how to learn from tzaddikim is to listen to their stories about them. How they acted. How they behaved. It gives a Jew an idea, a perspective, what it means to be a Jew. When you hear about the Gidolim and the greatness that they did, it changes you. In the book, Stories of Spirit of Faith, Rabbi David Sutton, who is his son-in-law, he's a Syrian rabbi, he's also the son-in-law of Rabbi Nosson Sherman, the guy in charge of Art School. And he writes in the book over here, Rabbi Nosson Sherman, on his son-in-law's Sefer, he writes as follows. The Hazon Ish, everyone heard of the Hazon Ish? One of the biggest halachic authorities of the previous generation, biggest scholars of the time. He would say, listen what he said. The Hazon Ish writes, he writes this, we have it still today, that the biographies of Torah scholars are an important part of Torah study. Reading biographies is an important part of Torah. He says, reading a biography of a tzaddik is like reading a Musar Sefer, because you learn how to act and behave. He went on to say that he spent much time reading such works, and that every Jewish home should have biographies of righteous people. To read the stories, the Ma'asim Tovim of Tzaddikim. A young scholar asked the Hazon Ish for advice on raising children. And the Hazon Ish said, in the previous generation there were many living role models that your children can learn from. But today there are less. So what should you do for your children? Tell them ma'asim, stories of tzaddikim of the previous generations. Teach them the stories. It's not entertainment, but it's to teach us how to behave. Harav Ezer Atiyah, the legendary Rosh Yeshiva, Porat Yosef, would summon one of his most brilliant students, Harav Yosef Ades, Ham Yosef Ades, and he would say, come, I got to teach you special Torah. He came to his office, he's all excited to learn, and Rav Ezer Atiyah starts telling him about stories of tzaddikim from Aleppo. He says, what's this? The Rosh Yeshiva tells him, my son, don't think that you wasted your time. Hearing stories of tzaddikim is valuable Torah study. This is Torah study. It's Musar. We have to hear the stories of tzaddikim. There was a great Chacham in the Syrian Sephardic community of Flatbush. His name was Chacham Baruch ben Chaim. Chacham Baruch ben Chaim says, how did he become such a big tzaddik? Become a Chacham. He says that at night, every night, his mother would read him bedtime stories from the Sefer of the Ben Ish Chai, Niflaot Ma'asecha. And he says he would hear the stories of his mother telling him the stories, and he would want to be that way, act that way, change that way. And he says, when I first went to Porat Yosef, I was so scared to go. All the Talmid Chachamim were learning there. I asked my mother what it's like there. And she says, when you go there, ask them to show you the Beit Midrash. Sitting in the Beit Midrash, angels are learning there. Tzaddikim are learning there. But she said angels. He said, I came there the first day. I asked someone to show me. I saw literally angels sitting and learning. I said, I also want to be there. But what do we do with our children? We put Disney for them. Smatri. Cinderella, Snow White, Princess, Prince, and Charming. What you teach yours? All nonsense stuff. Goldilocks and the Three Bears. What are you teaching them? This I don't like. This I don't like. Misha and Masha, and you put on all these stories for them, and then they become Misha and Masha, and they become the Three Bears, and they become Snow White, Small White, Bow White, and all these things.
What happened to Harry Potter?
Oh, Gary Potter. Right? Our precious children. Our precious children. Niflaot Ma'asecha. Ma'asim tovim. She'ikar told tehem shel tzadikim. The main children of tzadikim is Ma'asim tovim. Their biggest deeds are their good stories. And we have stories after stories of tzadikim. Because there's no one else on this planet who has Torah that we and the Jewish people have, that have created the most nicest of people on earth. Rabotai, we just talked about being humble in the previous lesson. I want to tell you a story of Moshe Feinstein. I just heard the story about 2-3 weeks ago. Rav Moshe Feinstein. Everyone knows him. Posek Hador, the greatest Gadol in America. 1980s. Right? Erev Pesach. How do you think the Gadol's day is? Busy. How many questions are coming from hotels and restaurants and people and this and that? And every year, Erev Pesach, a few hours before Pesach, a woman, a widow, would call him and ask him questions about her medications for Pesach, if they were okay or not. She had cardiac issues, and and her Moshe would say, and go listen to every medication and say, it's okay, it's okay. And he would talk to her a little bit about this, about that. And she did this for 20 years straight. And Rav Moshe, one year, doesn't get a phone call from her. Right? What does he do? He calls her. Erev Pesach. He has nothing better to do. But he's a gadol. He's so great. Why? Because he's such an anah. He has so much hand. He thinks about the other person. It's not me. It's not all about me. Stop thinking. It's not about you. It's not about you. It's not about you. It's about Klal Yisrael. There's more to the world. Hashem didn't put me in the world about me. Rabbi Akiva Eger was coming into town. And at the same time, there was another gadol coming into town. And the minhag of the town was, when the tzaddik comes in, they would take off the horses and they themselves would carry the wagon. And the people knew Rabbi Akiva Eger was coming, this gadol was coming. They started walking in front of the wagons, taking off the horses. They got into the city, they looked inside the wagons. There's nobody inside. Rabbi Akiva Eger went out to the other wagon, and the Rav from the other wagon came to the other wagon to hold it. Each one giving kavod to the other. Nobody's inside the wagon. Why? Because he's a Gedolim. It's a great people. It's not about me. It's about the other guy. If everyone would be about the other guy, it would work out. You know, if you think for a second about the Dor HaFloga, right? Towards the end, we have the people who build the Tower of Babylon, right? And God punished them by giving them 70 different languages, and everyone got confused, and they started hitting each other with hammers and bricks and stuff like that. I don't know about you, but I've worked with people who can't speak English, okay? You point to him. You tell him this, wash it. This, do it like this. And people understand it. So how could it be? The guy said, give me a brick. And he took a hammer and hit him on the head. You have to be really a big imbecile to get it wrong. The guy's saying brick. He's showing a brick. And you take a hammer and hit him on the head. Why? Says the Chachamim. Because they were not together. Each one was building the tower to go against Hashem for himself. He didn't want to be with Hashem. They weren't doing it by Ahdut. They were doing it for separate reasons. And that's why now they couldn't understand themselves anymore. We Jews, you can have a Jew from Spain, a Jew from here, a Jew from there. We all get together. All of a sudden we all can feel each other. Jew and non-religious, religious, everybody's coming together. Because we're not about me. About the other guy. We're all in this together. This is all happening to us everywhere. Nobody is immune. Just because you're living in New York doesn't make it any better. They're chanting off with our heads and Gaz the Jews, and all these things are happening right now in the Western countries, on college campuses, in the streets of Brooklyn, where there's the greatest Jewish population. But we know we're all together in this. We're all looking out for each other. And what are we supposed to do? Rabotai, there was once Harv Aryeh Levin, Zecher Tzadik Lebracha, was giving a shir, and he was talking about Shalom Bayit. And at the end of the shir, Rav Isser Zalman Meltzer, one of the Gedolim, come over to Rav Aryeh Levin and tells him, Yashur Koach for speaking, I'm going to change myself. And Rav Aryeh Levin says, Rav Isser Zalman, I didn't mean you. And Rav Isser Zalman says, what do you mean? I heard every word you were saying was talking to me directly. Why? We hear so many things of what to do. Be modest, give more tzedakah, more learn Torah. And a lot of us have a tendency, he's talking about that guy. He needs to learn more. He needs to give tzedakah. She needs to dress more modest. They need to keep Shabbat. No. Our Gedolim tell us that this is Zalman Meltzer here to Shira by Shalom Bayit. He said it's for me. It's me. So the only time we're supposed to think of me, listen to this, Rabotai, I want to make it clear. The only time you're supposed to think of me is when it's for self-improvement. All of the times you think of the other person. What do they need? How can I help them? How can I make their life better? Me? How can I improve my midot? Now you understand the relationship. But Noach matzachem b'nei Amonai. Ken imtzachem. Tzerdov b'nei Elohim ve'adam. When you think about the other person and you improve yourself, that's when you find chen. Rabotai, there was a man who was at a levaya of a Talmud from the Mir Yeshiva. And one of the Hespedim, they said that this man finished Shisha Sidra Mishnah 40 times. And this man was like, wow, how did he do it? He didn't just go home and say, how did he do it? He said, if he can do it, then I'm also going to do it. And he started to try. That's what we have to do. You hear about your friend keeping Shabbat stronger? You hear about your friend dressing more modest? That's the time to say, they can do it, I can do it. And they start to change. Rav Isser Zalman Meltzer, Zecher Tzadik Lebracha, was once walking. And he was thinking in his learning, and he accidentally walked into a ditch full of wet cement. I mean, what do you do when you fall into a ditch of wet cement? And you're gone. Rav Isser Zalman Meltzer didn't move from there. He waited till the owner of that place would come. And then he said, I'm sorry, how much do I owe you for messing up the cement? Rav Isser Zalman Meltzer. Rav Steinman was once giving a shir using a microphone. But he never touched the microphone. So they asked him, why you don't touch the microphone? He said, my whole life, I never touch anything that doesn't belong to me. How careful they are with other people's money. And what about us? We learn these stories. We have a lot to do. Rabotai, we said the Ma'asim Tovim of Tzadikim is the Ikar. To learn their good stories is so important. Hazon Ish said it's a musar. You have to learn them. It's a part of Torah study. I want to tell you, as it was Maran's Yortzeit this week, Chamuvadia would say about stories. Listen what he said about stories, Abutai. I just want to read you the quotes from his own shiur when he talked about stories. He said a story is the point of connection between a scholar and the masses. People fall asleep when you lecture about halakha or you lecture about other high things, but everyone can connect to a nice story. Again, in another shiur, he said, not every Jew is a scholar, and it's imperative that we bring Torah to their level. Tell them simple stories. Ignite their spirit of holy faith. So much so that in this biography of Chacham Ovadia, they write that Chacham Ovadia, when he started his shiurim, he made serialized stories, meaning every shiur, he would say a little bit more of the story. And people would come to hear the story. And while they were there, they learned everything else. How important it is to use stories. But to add one more point to all of this. Add one more point to stories, Abotai. There's a pasuk in Tehillim. It says, Hashem, in Tehillim 119, the path of your mitzvot, let me understand. Ve'asicha b'niflotecha, and I will talk about your miracles. Said the Hasid Yavitz. What does this mean? Saying, Hashem, let us understand your mitzvot and talk about them. Let me understand your ways and I'll talk about them. And then the Hasid Yavitz writes, V'hamidaber b'nifloot haboreh motzeh hen be'inav. Another hand. How else do you get favor? By saying stories of the miracles of Hashem. Talking about saying the story of Yisiat Mitzrayim. That's what we say. Someone who talks more about it, he's greater. Why? Because he gets more hand. He gets more favor. Because why? He understands that Hashem made miracles. And he says over here further, he says everybody's life, everybody needs to look at their own life and say, where did Hashem help me? Where did I see the Yad Hashem? And the more anav you are, the more humble you are, the more you realize Hashem has done so much more for me. And then you can say so much more stories about the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then you get yourself more and more hand. Because a person who has the midah of humility, of being humble, realizes it's all from Yad Hashem. My money, my car, my job, my wife, my this, my everything is all from God. And he realized how Hashem put him. How I met my spouse, how I got my job, how I got home, how this happened, how that happened. And he realizes it's from Hashem. And he talks about the greatness of Hashem. Right there. He's Nimtza Hen, says the Hasid Yavitz. How important it is to say stories. Stories about tzaddikim. Stories to get people enticed into learn Torah. And stories about your own life. And how you saw Hashem's hand every step of the way. That's our job. To hear and share stories. That's why it's one of my favorite, that's why I said again, it's one of my favorites. I love sharing stories. Everybody likes to hear a story. But there's so much greatness in sharing a story. All right, let's move on to another lesson on this week's Parshat. The Midrash tells us that when Abraham Avinu met Shem, right, he met Malki Tzedek, he asked Malki Tzedek, how did you guys survive the Mabul. And so Shem tells him, because we were humble and we performed Hesed. When Avraham Avinu heard this, he said, that's how you survive? He went and he built his eshel. He built his hotel, his four-door tent. And he served everybody himself. He didn't say, I'm Avraham Avinu, God's talking to me. Everyone. No. As an Anav, he went and he served everybody. He stood under the tree serving them. And he provided Hesed to everyone. And when it comes to Hesed, we have to understand that the Yetzer Hara likes to mess up with our Hesed. Right? There's a lot of forms of this, but I want to focus on one. Some people are under the impression that doing Hesed means outside of the house. If I'm doing Hesed inside, that's not Hesed. All right, that's me trying to get my wife to stop nagging me, to take out the garbage, to fix this, to fix that. That's not Hesed. Hesed is if it's a stranger and I help them. Oh, now it's Hesed. And that's a very, very mistaken approach. It says over here, Rav Simcha Cohen, he says, if someone is a Hesed outside of the house, and inside the house he does nothing, he's an achzar, he's a cruel person. Because he's not really a Hesed. Now the reason why people do that, or the psychological reason could be, is that outside the house, when you do a Hesed, everybody taps you on the back, pats you on the back, you're a great guy, whoa, yes, go ahead. At home you did it, they might not even say thank you, right? And there was no instant gratification for helping somebody out. When you do it for a stranger, you feel a lot better because they applaud you for it. Okay, that's where the psychology gets in. But the truth is, if you're about Hesed, it's not about me feeling good that you pat me on the back. It's rather because I'm on heaven, I'm doing it for you. I want to help you. That's the mitzvah, helping the other person. And he says here, can you ever imagine that there's a man who goes to work, makes big money, and spends only 10% on himself and gives everything else away? He says such people exist. He says there's some women that drop everything, don't do anything for themselves, and meanwhile do everything for everyone else. And he was giving the shiur in a secular community in Eretz Yisrael, one of the kibbutzim. And he was saying this is what religious people do. So the person there says, Rabbi, you're lying. It's impossible. Someone would work and give away everything. And the rabbi says to them, I'm not even talking about the religious people. I'm talking about you. They say, how can it be? He says, you're a father? He says, yeah. He says, you don't work night and day and then give everything to your children? All right? How much we work night and day for the mortgage to put a house over our children and give them food? Wouldn't it be a lot easier just to remain single? You get a little apartment, you don't even spend, you're going to save so much money in the bank? We don't understand how much Hesed we're even doing naturally. But if you paid attention, you just turned everything to a huge mitzvah. The woman, the wife, not sleeping, not eating, taking care of everyone. How much mitzvah, how much Hesed she's doing? The greatness of them. But he says some people, unfortunately, some people who don't realize it. He says a true story that happened in Eretz Yisrael. There was a kollel man, that he was one day going to kollel, running a little bit late, and on his way he sees a woman carrying tons of bags from the grocery. So he says, should I go help her or not? No, not tzniut, it's not proper, she's a woman. And he sees she's really like that, and he says, kollel, I'm late. Then he says, you know what, I'm going to do a mitzvah. Hesed, very important. He runs over to the woman not looking, says, Geveret, let me help you. She puts down the bags. He takes it, he says, where do you want me to take it to? She doesn't answer. She says, Geveret, where do you want me to take it to? I have to go quickly. And she says, Moish, you don't realize your own wife anymore? He looks up, he says, oh, Malki, it's you. I'm too late for kollel. Here's the bags, and runs away. How? A true cruel person. Because Hesed is about the other person. It makes you feel good when I do it for somebody else. But no, Rabotai. Hesed is at home. Chesed starts right away. That's how we know it's the truth. And I will tell you, with this, 3 lessons. A lot of stories on it. Lesson number 1. The importance of being an anav and how that gets a person hen. Humbleness leads to being favored by God. Lesson number 2, the importance of sharing true stories of tzaddikim to our children and to ourselves and learn them as musar, of how to be letter Jews. And our 3rd lesson, of how Chesed begins at home. And true Chesed is not about how I feel, but how I can do for the other person. And not about how they're going to pat me on my back, but rather I'm doing it because that's true Chesed. And the truest form is to our family. Now the question is, how do you define your family? How far is it? It starts with your spouse, your children, your cousins, and all of Klal Yisrael could be your family. If you are able to spread that blanket of family over everyone without excluding your immediate family. And with this, I want to wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom.